50 years of living in injustice. A black mother is brutally beaten by the police right in front of her home. But what happens when her daughter, a secret agent, decides to take revenge? Will justice prevail, or will the darkness consume everything? The rain poured relentlessly in the cold night over Chicago's south side. The fine, needle-like raindrops pierced through the darkness, cascading down the old roof at the corner of Ashland and 89th. The streetlights cast a dim glow on the peeling walls of a faded blue house, making it appear submerged in a hazy mist. Inside the small kitchen, 60-year-old Lila Thompson, a black woman, slowly cleaned up after dinner. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, and the scarf around her head bore the marks of time. Her hands, rough but steady, moved with practiced ease, as though she had been cleaning this kitchen her entire life. The air was filled with the faint aroma of collard greens still simmering, and she softly hummed an old hymn, a song her mother used to sing when she was alive. In that moment, Lila's world seemed so simple. The ticking of the wall clock, the rhythmic patter of the rain on the roof, and the fragile peace that felt like it could never be broken. Until 3 sharp knocks shattered the silence. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor seeking shelter from the rain, nor someone asking for directions or help. It was a forceful, decisive knock, one that carried a threat, spread. Lila froze. The dishcloth slipped from her hand, its wetness staining the floor as it spread like blood. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest like a warning bell. She walked slowly toward the living room, where the streetlight cast its pale glow through the lace curtains. Through the foggy window, she could see 2 tall figures in uniform standing beneath the porch, their silhouettes barely visible in the storm. The flashing patrol car lights blinked behind them, casting red and blue hues on the wall as though they were illuminating an invisible sentence. The taller man raised a stack of papers, his gaze cold, indifferent, sending a chill through Lila's body. She unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to speak. Rain poured relentlessly from the eaves onto the officer's shoes, soaking them. "How can I help you?" Lila's voice was calm, steady, but cautious. The taller man responded, "I'm Officer Burke, and this is Officer Langston. We're here to enforce an immediate eviction order." He held up the papers. Bold uppercase heading, "Imminent eviction order. Effective immediately." Lila squinted, trying to make sense of it. "Eviction? You're mistaken. I've owned this house for 27 years. Burke didn't blink. "We've received reports of illegal activities concerning this house. It's under investigation and must be sealed immediately." Her breath caught. There was something in his tone, cold, too formal, that felt off. She reached for the papers, but Burke pulled them back, keeping them just out of reach. "We need you to leave the house now." Officer Langston, silent, subtly placed his hand on his sidearm, an action that was not meant for safety, but a subtle warning. Layla looked at the gun, then up into their eyes. Fear spread through her, but she stood tall. "I want to see the judge's signature," she said, her voice growing firmer. "This isn't a rental dispute. It's my home." The rain outside continued its relentless tapping on the porch, like the ominous soundtrack to an unfolding nightmare. But inside Lila Thompson's small house, everything had just shifted into a waking terror. As soon as she uttered the words, "I want to see the judge's signature," Officer Burke's gaze darkened as if something within him had snapped, no longer patient or pretending to follow legal procedure. Burke suddenly slammed his shoulder into the door. The impact broke the metal chain, and the door flew open violently, crashing against the wall with a deafening sound that echoed through the empty room. Lila barely had time to step back, only managing to shout in panic as Burke's large frame pushed through, forcing her to stagger backward. "Get out of here, you piece of trash," he roared, his voice harsh, filled with contempt. In the dim kitchen light, his face appeared twisted with malice, his eyes burning with fury, and his jaw clenched as though he were holding back an explosion of rage. Lila stammered, "You don't have the right. This is my home." But before she could finish her sentence, Langston, the scrawny officer behind him, lunged forward without warning. He shoved both hands hard into Lila's chest, sending her crashing onto the old wooden floor. Her back slammed into the hard surface with a pain that shot through her like a knife stabbing into her spine. The pain left her dizzy, but the horror was far from over. Langston growled, "Resistance? Let me show you who holds the power here." Like someone emboldened by the authority to enforce violence, he raised his foot and kicked violently into her right knee. A sickening crack echoed, sharp and clear, like the sound of bones snapping, causing Lila's body to convulse in agony. She screamed, a cry of a person driven to the edge, but in response, only Langston's cold, mocking laugh filled the air. No one gives a damn about you, you old piece of... Outside, the streetlights still flickered, seemingly unaware of the horror unfolding inside. A 60-year-old black woman who had never harmed anyone was writhing in pain on the floor of her own home, humiliated, beaten, trampled upon by those who were supposed to uphold the law. No one intervened. No one shouted. And in that moment, Lila understood something profound. If she didn't speak up, if no one witnessed it, the truth would be buried, and that cruel man would continue to crush good people like her as if nothing had ever happened. The sharp pain in her knee made it impossible for Lila to stand. She lay there, her chest heaving in agony, her frail hands trembling as they searched for something to hold on to. The cold, wet floor seeped into her back, while the rainwater pouring through the open door mingled with the blood trickling from her swollen knee. Lila stretched her body, reaching for the door frame, which quivered in the wind as if clinging to the last remnants of her dignity amidst the chaos. Her fingers, rough and calloused from years of honest labor in the canning factory, trembled as they desperately tried to keep her from collapsing again. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down her wrinkled face, mixing with the cold rain. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. This is my home. I was born here. This place is all I have. But her words were nothing more than a whisper in the storm. Burke looked at her with a contempt so deep it seemed to seep from his very soul. This dump? Don't think you're worthless. Poverty-stricken shell of a house means anything, he sneered. Then, without hesitation, he swung his fist, an explosive punch aimed directly at her face. The heavy thud echoed, his fist hitting flesh, and somewhere beneath her thin skin, a bone snapped. Lila's body crumpled to the floor like a discarded rag. Blood gushed from her nose, dark and thick, dripping onto the old wooden floor, mingling with the rainwater that had flooded in from the open door, creating a long red streak, an undeniable mark of the brutality unfolding in her own home. Lila curled up, clutching her face, coughing, her mouth gasping in pain and panic. Burke sneered, wiping the blood from his fingers with a black handkerchief, muttering, "People like you just cry and leech off others. You'd better get out of here before I kick that old, rotting head of yours out of this house." Outside, the light from the neighboring houses began to flicker. The neighbors, familiar faces, those who had shared meals and gone to church with Lila, now dared only to peer through their curtains. Some slightly cracked open their blinds. Some heard the screams. Some saw the silhouettes of Burke and Langston, but no one stepped out. No one dialed 911. No one dared, because they knew on this street, if you dared intervene when the police were angry, tomorrow there would be no home left to return to. And so, Lila Thompson, a woman who had lived a life of decency, was left alone in a house that was slowly being overtaken by force, blood, and the chilling silence of the neighbors she once called friends, while outside, Burke's mocking laughter echoed, his soaked boots trampling the blood of an innocent woman. A world completely different was plunging into a cold, eerie silence on the other side of the country. Inside a secure underground room at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, the pale green glow from surveillance screens reflected off the face of Maya Thompson, a sharp, composed black woman in her early 30s. As if she was born to read the danger in every situation, she sat alone in the emergency briefing room, a place where everything was sealed tight, and no one could enter except those with the highest clearance. On the table before her, a thick dossier on a cyber attack originating from Eastern Europe remained open, the code still half decoded. Yet Maya's eyes drifted from the tangled lines of encryption. Her personal phone in her pocket buzzed, something that almost never happened in the communication-free zone. Maya frowned, pulling the device out, the light from the screen illuminating her strong jawline. An unknown number. She was about to ignore it when the phone buzzed again, urgent, desperate. She answered. The voice on the other end crackled, distorted by the weak signal, but the panic was unmistakable. "Maya? Is that you?" "It's me, Mrs. Jenkins, your mother's neighbor." We don't know what to do." Maya shot up, feeling as though the ceiling itself had caved in. "What? What are you saying?" she nearly screamed. Mrs. Jenkins's voice trembled, mixed with the sound of rain and distant sobs. "Your mom, they're beating her in front of the house. They don't have a warrant. They're yelling at her. They knocked her down. Blood is pouring. I'm so scared. We can't come out because they have guns. Maya, please do something." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. The camera would zoom in on Maya's face, her eyes wide in those first few seconds, shocked, horrified, then slowly narrowing like a steel door locking away her emotions. Her gaze shifted from stunned to cold, like a battle machine being activated. Her lips pressed tightly together, jaw clenched, and her eyes, the eyes that had seen the world's most brutal secrets, now shone with something else: hatred. She didn't need to ask more questions, no need to verify. She knew her mother. She knew that neighborhood. And if her mother was being beaten, the truth had no place in the story anymore. She ended the call, stepping back a pace, her eyes fixed on the wall before her, nothing but darkness. Then she turned, took the encrypted card hanging around her neck, and scanned it through the security door. A beep echoed. The door opened. Maya disappeared into the dark hallway where no one would know where she was going or what she was about to do. But she knew, and the viewers knew. A steel fury was wrapped in the cold exterior of a senior agent. This time, the pain didn't come from an international mission or security threat. It came from something far more sacred. Her mother, the woman who had given her life, was being trampled by those wearing uniforms and calling it justice. A storm was forming, and Maya Thompson was the eye of the storm. Beneath a moonless, heavy night sky, the steel door of the CIA headquarters opened silently, almost ceremoniously. Maya Thompson stepped out, her tall, slender figure clad in a tight black suit that seemed to absorb the very light around her. There were no farewell gestures, no colleagues to see her off, because this mission was not in any official record. She wore a utilitarian backpack, devoid of logos or identifiers, which contained everything she needed. This included a customized Glock 19, a set of listening devices, a signal jammer, a mini camera, an encrypted laptop, and other high-tech, classified tools accessible only to senior agents like her. No words, no hesitation. Maya walked directly to the underground parking garage, where a black sedan waited silently. She slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat still for a few moments in the dark. The faint green glow of the interior lights illuminated her face, cold, resolute, devoid of any trace of the vulnerable girl who had once cried at her father's funeral. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The night wind slipped through the cracked window, carrying a distant echo of Washington. But her mind was in Chicago, where the woman who had given birth to her lay in blood, in the cursed silence of a fearful neighborhood. Maya pressed the gas pedal. The car shot forward like an arrow into the night, passing checkpoints where no one dared stop her. There was no room for hesitation within her. This was not a mission that could fail. This was a declaration of war. The brutal training at Camp Perry, the years spent hiking through forests, swimming through swamps, disguising herself under enemy fire, all of it now converged into each breath, each push on the gas pedal. But unlike every mission before, this time she wasn't fighting for a country or a flag or diplomatic interests. This time, she was fighting for her own flesh and blood. The corridors of old memories rushed back. Her mother's silver hair as she bent down to wash Maya's feet when she had a fever, the warm laughter from the summer kitchen, the worried gaze when Maya asked to go study far away. And now, that very woman was being dragged by those wearing hats with the emblem of justice. They didn't know who they had crossed. They thought they were expelling an old, weak black woman with no one to back her up, no one to care. They were wrong. She was no longer Maya, the behavior analyst from the Gulf. She was no longer the intelligence agent gathering intel from the Middle East. She was a disciplined fury, a walking verdict, and this time, it was the officers in uniforms who were the target of her pursuit. She didn't need armor. All she needed was the truth and hands that had long been accustomed to pulling the trigger when necessary. Each mile she crossed carried a question with no answer. How long would they endure before the truth hit them like a fiery storm? On the empty highway just before dawn, the viewers watched as Maya's car sped under the long stretch of amber streetlights. glowing like an endless line. A sense of tension rose, suffocating with anticipation, because everyone knew when a fighting machine like her returned to her hometown, no one would be allowed to continue trampling on people like her mother. And once blood had been shed, the truth would be returned by justice or by steel and fire. The sound of tires rolling over the highway hummed beneath the car like the faint pull of an undercurrent. Maya kept a steady grip on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. But in her mind, she was no longer in the present. She was drifting backward, swimming upstream in time, back to a summer afternoon, a day that had etched itself in her memory like a scar that would never fade. At that time, she was only 10 years old, young, vulnerable, and still believing in the fairness of the world. That day, Maya was taken by her mother to a small protest in the park. A group of neighborhood residents, mostly from the impoverished parts of town, were holding signs demanding clean water, road repairs, and an end to the evictions of black families for a new development project. Maya didn't fully understand, but she could see the fire in her mother's eyes as she spoke with the others, hear her mother chanting, "Justice for Englewood," like a bell ringing out to wake up the whole neighborhood. But then the police came. Not one or two officers, but a whole squad with shields, batons, and riot vehicles. They didn't ask. They didn't negotiate. They rushed in as though Maya's mothers, fathers, and neighbors were criminals, dangerous enemies. And Maya watched, through the innocent eyes of a child who didn't yet know what hatred meant, as her mother, Lila Thompson, was grabbed from behind by two officers and dragged along the sidewalk like a piece of trash. Her mother's white blouse tore, her knees scraped, and then one of the officers kicked her straight in the stomach. The blow made her bend over, her mouth letting out a chilling groan, blood spilling from the corner of her mouth, staining her chest, which was already covered in dirt and mud. But she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She forced her face up, her eyes still burning with fire, and screamed in a hoarse voice, "You can't crush us forever. We are human." Maya stood there, not far from her mother, caught in the chaos of the crowd, too small to push through, too scared to shout. But her tears flowed like an unstoppable stream. She wanted to run to her mother, wanted to help her up, but her legs felt like they were frozen to the concrete. Her cry at that moment wasn't loud, but in Maya's memory now, it rings out like a curse. Weak, helpless, and forever unforgettable. The scene around her began to blur, and when Maya blinked, she was back in the car. Her hand was still gripping the wheel, but her knuckles were white. Her breath came faster. Her eyes now gleamed with a cold, metallic light, no longer a fire but the steel of a well-sharpened weapon. Because the men who beat her mother today, Burke, Langston, and the system that enabled them, were just another part of the long chain of those who had kicked Lila's stomach all those years ago, the long chain of arrogant white power clashing against the lives of poor black people. And this time, Maya was no longer the 10-year-old girl trapped behind a crowd. She was the woman holding the skills, the technology, and the sharpened fury to fight back. They had repeated the past, but she wouldn't let them end it the same way. The pain had been passed down through 2 generations, but now, so was the resistance. And Maya would be the one to rewrite the ending with everything she had. Back in the present, the headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, stretching endlessly beneath the cold night. The rain from midnight had stopped, but the mist still clung to the windshield, casting a hazy, indistinct layer over the scenery, much like the memories that had just come rushing back into Maya's mind. She slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road next to a desolate field outside Indianapolis. The silence was suffocating. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the engine and the thundering beat of her own heart in her chest. Maya sat there for a few seconds, as if trying to keep herself from shattering under the weight of the memories that had pierced her heart. Slowly, she reached out and opened the small compartment beside the passenger seat. Inside, carefully folded like a treasured artifact, was a yellowed photograph. She took the photo in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. In the picture, she, around 8 years old, was smiling brightly, standing beside her mother, Lila Thompson. The two were embracing on the porch of their old house in Chicago, with the shade of a large elm tree behind them, where Maya's favorite swing once hung. Her mother was young then, her hair not yet grayed, her smile still radiant, her eyes not yet filled with the weariness of years of oppression. It was a peaceful Sunday afternoon, a day when the world hadn't yet hurt them enough to turn love into anger. Maya bit her lip, her eyes fixed on the photograph, and like a wave crashing over her, she was pulled back into a deep memory. The hospital scene that followed the day her mother was beaten at the protest. The strong smell of antiseptic, the harsh fluorescent lights casting down on her mother's bruised skin. Lila lay silently on the bed, her abdomen wrapped in bandages, struggling to breathe from broken ribs. Her weak hand grasped Maya's hand. Maya, only 10 years old, standing beside the bed, her eyes swollen from crying. Her mother's voice, hoarse but resolute. "You have to be stronger than I was. Do you hear me? Strong enough to stand up when no one else dares to speak. Speak out." Maya had squeezed that hand tightly, looking up with red eyes, speaking each word as if from the depths of her soul. "I won't let them hurt you again. I swear. No matter who they are." Now, as Maya sat alone in the car, her eyes glinted like a sharpened blade. Her hand, still holding the photograph, slowly placed it on the steering wheel. She then reached into her bag, pulling out a Glock 19, expertly checking the ammunition, then reassembling it with cold precision. Her breath was deep and even, each inhale a warrior's calm before stepping into the hell ahead. There was no fear left in her eyes, only silence, the silence of someone who had endured too much pain and was now ready to turn that pain into action. "They think my mother is an easy target," Maya whispered, her voice low and tightly controlled, like a sword being drawn from its sheath. "They think no one will stand up, but they don't know who I am." She shifted the gear and slammed her foot on the gas. The car shot forward, leaving a trail of dust behind like a slash across the dark night. And with it, a vow that was no longer that of a child, but of a killer honed by injustice, ready to strike back not with tears, but with truth, and if necessary, with blood. The night remained as dark as oil stretching across the I-65 highway when Maya stopped the car once again. This time, beneath the shadow of an abandoned gas station. The surrounding area was eerily quiet, with only the sound of the wind brushing past broken billboards and the flickering streetlights signaling an imminent shutdown. She turned off the engine, pushed the seat back, and opened her backpack. From within the protective fabric, Maya retrieved a slim black laptop. No logo, no standard operating system, an instrument specially designed by the CIA for alpha agents like her. On the cover, a faint scratch from a mission in Yemen made her touch it briefly, as if feeling the memory. She powered the laptop on. The screen displayed a strange, encrypted interface not meant for civilian eyes. Maya connected to a backup satellite and activated the software to track the civilian and private cameras around the south side of Chicago. Her fingers moved quickly, like a dancer on stage, typing commands instinctively, without hesitation. After a series of verifications, her mother's neighborhood map appeared. Intersections, wide-angle cameras, and a network of traffic cams. Within seconds, the feed from the camera at 89th and Ashland popped up. The first image made Maya freeze for half a second. On the screen, Burke and Langston were standing right in front of her mother's old house. Burke was grinning, holding a cigarette, while Langston casually kicked something at his feet. Then the camera panned slowly, revealing Lila lying motionless on the front porch, blood streaming from her forehead, soaking into the cracked mortar between the old bricks. One of her hands hung limply off the step, her silver hair matted with rain and blood. Maya stiffened. There was no sound around her, no breath, only her heart pounding like a war drum. Her eyes locked on the screen, unblinking, as if trying to engrave every pixel into her mind. Her eyelids twitched, the blood vessels in her temples expanded. The camera zoomed in closer on Burke's face. He was pointing at Lila's body as if it were a trophy. And Langston? He was taking pictures. He had pulled out his phone and was snapping photos. The scene was beyond cruelty. It was mockery. The imagined camera angle now zoomed in on Maya's eyes, no longer the deep brown of calm, but now a fire, a refined rage, silent and cold, with the power to burn the world to the ground. Her hands began to type faster, encrypting the commands, accessing more cameras in the neighboring area. She found 2 more angles from a nearby convenience store and gas station, each confirming Burke and Langston had been there, provided no medical assistance, and left the scene as if nothing had happened. Maya gritted her teeth, then whispered in a low, slow, venomous voice, "You'll regret this." For touching her. She didn't yell, because people like Maya don't need to shout to threaten. She declared it as if signing a death sentence. The black sedan tore into Chicago around 3 a.m. The city, still deep in sleep, yet the darkness felt more awake than ever. The sky was thick with low-hanging clouds, and the harsh glow of streetlights splashed unevenly on the sidewalk, creating patches of light and shadow, much like the city itself, a place where the law and lawlessness lived side by side in every alley. Maya drove without headlights in the back alley, the engine's hum so soft it was like breathing. She had returned to the city where she grew up, but this time it wasn't for a visit, it wasn't for nostalgia, it was for the hunt. She stopped the car a couple of blocks away from Police Station 12. This was the headquarters where Burke and Langston often hung out, a place they thought was their safe haven, protected by the law. But tonight, the rules had changed. Maya pulled her hood up, her hair hidden beneath the black fabric. The outfit she wore was form-fitting, agile, and silent, allowing her to blend into the night like a shadow. She moved through the grass behind a closed bakery, vaulted over a rusty chain-link fence with a quick, quiet leap. The station's parking lot was behind the building, dimly lit with only a few flickering yellow lights from electrical shorts. Maya pressed against the wall, observing. 2 patrol cars, 12 to 107 and 12 to 203, were parked side by side. She knew from the access files that these were the cars Burke and Langston used for their night shift. Everything matched. There was no one on guard. No cameras still active behind. She had already disabled them remotely before arriving. Maya crouched beside car 12 to 107. From the small pouch clipped to her waist, she pulled out a circular device no larger than a mitt. An audio recorder capable of filtering noise and transmitting encrypted signals within a 500-meter radius. She slid down to the cold plastic of the car's undercarriage, then gently slid the device into a gap near the exhaust pipe. No click, no vibrations, only silence, and her hands, like an imagined close-up shot, moving swiftly, precisely, like a musician playing the silent symphony of revenge. She moved to car 12 to 203 next. This time, she attached a small GPS tracking device, activated by the smartwatch on her wrist. This device not only tracked location but also recorded the vehicle's speed, travel time, and even the sounds inside the cabin if the car's Bluetooth system was connected, something Maya knew Burke often used to play music, according to the internal coordination system she had extracted from the files. Once finished, Maya stepped back, her eyes scanning both cars. In that fleeting moment, she didn't see them as vehicles, they were mobile coffins. They were still alive, but from this moment forward, every step they took, every word they spoke, every breath they drew would be monitored, recorded, and used as evidence to expose everything. This was no longer an investigation. This was a meticulously organized manhunt, and Maya, with every cold movement, was the one setting the final trap to drag them into the light. She withdrew as silently as she had arrived, quietly, without leaving a trace. But behind her, the first seeds of their downfall had been planted on the cold cement of the city. And when they sprouted, all the excuses, all the badges, all the protective service titles would be ripped away from the mask they wore. No retreat. No second chances. The game had begun, and Maya was the one writing the rules. The sky was just beginning to lighten. The first rays of dawn struggled to pierce through the gray clouds, as if fighting to break through the darkness that hung over the city. In a makeshift room on the west side of Chicago, Maya sat motionless at the table, wearing specialized listening equipment, her eyes glued to the positioning display. The dots slowly moved across the digital map. Patrol cars 12 to 107 and 12 to 203 were leaving the police station, following their usual route through her mother's neighborhood. She had set up the sound filter, connecting the signal from the tiny microphone attached beneath the cars the night before. At first, all Maya could hear in her earpiece was the background noise, the hum of the engine, the wind whistling, the faint music from the radio. But then, the familiar voices began to cut through, clear and unmistakable. "Huh, did you see that old bitch's face? I punched her so hard. Blood splattered all over my shirt. Beating that old hag felt good. Her face was completely wrecked. Burke's laugh echoed, triumphant, like a butcher proudly showing off his latest kill after a public execution. Maya froze in her chair, her fist clenched tightly, her knuckles turning white. She didn't blink. Her heart didn't beat faster. It beat slower, heavy and steady, like the drum of war. Good riddance, Langston chimed in, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction and contempt. People like her are used to living in poverty, always whining, protesting, resisting. It's time they learned a lesson. He leaned back in his chair, his voice still reverberating in the cabin through the Bluetooth system. And everything was being recorded, word for word, by the microphone. Burke chuckled loudly, accompanied by the flick of a lighter. Keep going? Who's going to sue the cops here? This system's ours. If anyone opens their mouth, I know how to shut them up. A brief silence followed. Then both men burst into laughter, the kind of laughter from those who believe power is eternal and that their victims will forever stay silent in the dark. The imagined camera zoomed in on Maya's face, her jaw clenched tightly, a cold bead of sweat trailing down her temple, not from fear, but from restraint. Her eyes darkened like stone. Her breath was deep and controlled. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to cry. The blood rising to her face was no longer the blood of a grieving daughter. It was the blood of a killer who smelled the rot in the power structure. She hit the record button. The audio file was saved to an encrypted drive. Then she whispered, so no one could hear but herself, "You just dug your own graves." Maya stood up, her movements decisive. The game had changed, and now their laughter would be what ultimately destroyed them. Because Maya, the daughter of the woman they called trash, was here, listening to every word, recording every crime, and waiting for the moment to break everything they had once thought was invincible. The morning in Chicago began with feeble sunlight struggling to break through the dense gray clouds. The city, soaked in the remnants of last night's rain, seemed to hold its breath. The streets of Halstead Avenue stretched out in front. Patrol Car 12-107's tires whispered over the wet pavement, leaving behind a trail of dark streaks in the quiet stillness of the early hours. Inside the car, Burke reclined lazily in the driver's seat, his eyes half closed as he lazily adjusted the radio, his mind far from the mundane task of patrolling. Langston, on the other hand, chewed gum with a loud pop, snapping his fingers to the beat of some cheap hip-hop station, his thoughts drifting in the same direction: boredom, impatience, and the ease of their power. Suddenly, Burke's phone vibrated, interrupting the monotonous rhythm. The screen lit up with an anonymous number, no name, just a black, cryptic void staring back at him. He narrowed his eyes, instinctively furrowing his brow before answering the call with an air of caution. Years of dealing with shady dealings had sharpened his senses. Yeah. Burke's voice was steady, but his eyes flickered toward Langston, who had now stopped chewing gum and was staring at the road with an expression of vague interest. A silence hung on the line, thick with something unsettling. Then a voice broke through. The tone was low, icy, deliberate, and without the slightest hint of panic. It was the kind of voice that made Burke's stomach drop, despite the indifference in the words. "I know what you did to her." The words rang out, not harsh but precise, clear, and cold, like a blade scraping across stone. "I heard you. Every word you spoke. And I swear to you, Burke, you will pay. With blood." Burke froze. His heart skipped a beat. The weight of the words settled over him like a blanket of ice. His fingers clenched the steering wheel, his mind trying to make sense of the impossible. He sat up straighter, the blood draining from his face. A cold sweat began to creep down his neck as he glanced over at Langston. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some twisted joke. He could feel it. The threat was real. The next moments felt like they dragged on for an eternity. The phone slipped from his shaking hand, crashing to the floor of the patrol car. He watched, frozen, as the screen shattered into 1,000 pieces, but the voice, that voice, still reverberated in his mind, echoing like a death knell. His chest tightened as he gasped for air, his hands still trembling as if the words had physically struck him. Langston jerked his head toward Burke, the annoyance on his face fading into confusion and a flicker of concern. "What the hell was that?" Langston asked, his voice suddenly sharp, now fully aware something was wrong. Burke's eyes were wide with panic, his face as pale as a ghost, beads of sweat dotting his forehead despite the air conditioning running at full blast. His voice cracked as he spoke, his words spilling out in a hurried, disjointed rush. Someone's watching us. His breath hitched. It knows. It knows everything. He turned in the seat, his gaze darting wildly around the inside of the car, as if expecting someone or something to leap out from the shadows. His voice grew louder, almost desperate, as the realization of what was happening sank in. It knows what we did to her. It heard everything, every word we said. It said blood. Blood, Langston. Langston's brow furrowed, but instead of sharing in Burke's fear, he shot him an incredulous look. What do you mean? Who the hell was that? What did they say? What's going on, Burke? I don't know. Burke's voice was frantic now. He looked out the windows, through the rearview mirror, eyes searching for something. Anything. Proof that they weren't being hunted by some unseen force. His hands shook so violently that they couldn't even grip the steering wheel properly. But that voice, it was like a demon. Langston. It knows everything. Everything about the old lady. It knows what we did. And it said blood. The car fell into an oppressive silence. There were no more laughs, no more jokes about the old lady or the impunity they believed their badges gave them. The atmosphere inside the car thickened, a tension so thick it was suffocating. The air felt too heavy, pressing in from all sides. Langston was visibly unsettled now. He turned around, peering out the back window, then up at the rearview mirror. His hands were on the wheel, but his eyes darted nervously, as if looking for any sign of a tail. What the hell is going on, Burke? He muttered under his breath. Are we being followed? Are we being watched? But there was nothing. No cars, no shadowy figures lurking in the streets, no signs of anyone in pursuit. The streets outside were eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. Still, the sensation of being watched, of being hunted, hung in the air like a dark cloud, palpable and unnerving. Langston's voice cracked the silence, though his words barely made sense. Maybe you're just... But Burke was already on edge, his mind racing. He cut Langston off, his eyes wide, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. No, Langston. It knows everything. I'm telling you, someone's after us. Someone's watching us. And it's not over. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Maya sat quietly in a rundown hotel room. She removed her earpiece, her gaze sharp and unwavering, her fingers clenched around the edge of the table. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were unraveling. The sound of Burke's trembling voice, the uncertainty in Langston's tone, it was all she needed to know. Her anger didn't need to scream. It didn't need to shout from the rooftops. It was already working its way into the marrow of their bones, seeping into their very existence. Maya wasn't just seeking justice anymore. She wasn't just tracking them down for what they had done to her mother. She had become the message. She was the truth that had come knocking at their door. The darkness they had created was now coming back to haunt them, and there would be no escape, no hiding. The storm was here, and it was ready to take everything from them. She leaned back in the chair, her breath steady. The game had changed, and now the very sound of their laughter, their smug voices, would be their undoing. Maya was waiting. She had them in her sights, and when the time came, every word they'd spoken would be their last. The patrol car 12 to 107 made a sharp turn onto a narrow street, the tires screeching as they gripped the uneven asphalt, the wind whistling through the cracked windows. Inside, the air was taut as a bowstring. There was no music, no jokes, only two men simmering with an unnamed fear they couldn't even recognize. Burke drove with one hand, his other constantly tapping at the shattered phone screen, not really expecting anything. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, scanning for something invisible, something lurking behind them. Langston, on the other hand, was different. His jaw was clenched tight, his face flushed red, the usual swagger gone. He twisted in his seat, glaring at Burke, his voice hissing through his teeth. Who the hell did you talk to? Who knows about this other than you and me? Burke shot him a look, his voice low and dangerous. Are you out of your mind? I'm not dumb enough to go bragging about this. He slammed his fist into the dashboard. The thud reverberated through the car, making it shudder slightly. I'm no rookie. Langston didn't back down. Then how the hell does someone know exactly what you said? Word for word? Even your damn tone? No one else knew, Burke. I'm telling you, you've been watched. I was there too. Burke yelled, his throat tight with the rising panic gnawing at him. Do you think I'm stupid enough to set myself up? A heavy silence filled the car. The two men stared at each other, eyes full of suspicion, like two cornered animals. One more hint, one more piece of evidence, and they would have been at each other's throats. But then Langston growled, his voice sharp with anger and fear. We need to shut this down. We need to cut it off at the root. That old lady, she's still alive, right? Burke exhaled sharply, his eyes flickering with malice. I know what to do. We go back. We show her who's in charge. Let her know that if she opens her mouth, she's digging her own grave. Langston nodded, his grip tightening on the steering wheel like he was trying to crush it. No more hesitation. If someone is really watching us, we make the first move. And so, the car rolled forward again, heading straight for the small house at the end of 89th Street, the place where Lila had found temporary peace after the horror of the previous night. But this time, it would be different. In the shadows, Maya was watching their every move on the laptop screen in front of her. 2 GPS signals were moving rapidly in the direction of her mother's house. She could see everything. And this time, if they dared to step onto that porch again, Maya was ready to step out of the shadows. No more room for mercy, no more silent observation. Every move they made was now being recorded, and it would be punished, not by the law, but by the justice of a daughter who swore never to let her mother bleed again. And when those men wearing badges crossed that threshold once more, the last thing they would hear wouldn't be the cries of a helpless woman. It would be the sound of judgment coming from someone they were never prepared to face. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The 89th Street neighborhood was drowned in an impenetrable darkness, the only sound the wind cutting through rusted fences and sagging porches. The night was a trap, holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the entire block was holding its collective breath, unable to move, to react, as if the very city was preparing to swallow the night whole. No one was awake. No one heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the house at the very end of the alley, the small, weathered gray house where Lila Thompson, exhausted from countless nights of nightmares, tried to sleep. 2 figures moved like shadows toward the front door. Burke, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a heavy coat, black gloves tied around the handle of a baseball bat wrapped in duct tape. Langston, gaunt, his eyes sharp and cold as a blade, his hands steady as they gripped the back door handle. No words were spoken, only a shared glance, a silent understanding. They didn't need to say anything. They knew what was to be done. They didn't need an excuse, only to prove that no one could threaten them without paying the ultimate price. Not even an innocent old woman. Not even the mother of someone who had sworn to burn everything to the ground to protect her. Burke raised the bat. With a sickening crack, the window shattered, the glass breaking into 1,000 pieces that fell like shards of ice, ringing in the night. The sound echoed like a death knell, slicing through the quiet streets. Inside, Lila woke with a start, her heart racing, her breath caught in her throat, unable to understand what was happening. But before she could even process the noise, the front door was smashed open as if the force of a storm had struck it. She hadn't even gotten out of bed before Burke was already there, grabbing the collar of her nightgown with one hand, pulling her so violently that she was tossed off the mattress. Hey! Lila's scream choked in her throat, her frail body dragged roughly across the wooden floor. Her knee collided with the corner of the dresser, the pain searing through her body as blood began to trickle down. She clawed at the floor, the door frame, trying to hold on, but Burke's strength was overpowering. Let me go? Please, she gasped, but no one could hear her. Outside, the night was silent, as if the world had agreed to turn a blind eye to her suffering. Langston opened the back door, his eyes gleaming with the promise of more pain. Get her out to the yard. Hurry, he growled, his voice full of vicious urgency. Together, they dragged her outside, throwing her onto the cold, damp grass. She struggled weakly, her hands shaking as she tried to rise. But before she could get to her feet, Burke swung the bat with brutal force, bringing it down on her left shoulder. A sickening crack echoed in the air, the sound so sharp it seemed to freeze time. Lila crumpled to the ground, her body too broken to scream, her mouth open in a silent wail that was swallowed by the agony coursing through her. Her pain was so immense that even her voice couldn't escape her throat. "Old bitch," Burke snarled, his face twisted with hatred. "You think anyone's going to protect you?" Langston stepped forward, not even pausing for a second before delivering a savage kick to Lila's back. Then another. Then a third. "You want to die, old lady? I'll make sure you get what you want," he screamed, his face contorted with rage. His anger was a thing of deep, primal fury, a mixture of power and loathing. The venom he felt for Lila wasn't just because of what she represented, but for who she was, a poor, black, elderly woman who had no protection, no allies in a world that had already broken her down. Lila's body twisted in pain, her hands clutching her broken shoulder, her body trembling uncontrollably. She no longer cried out. Her eyes were wide, full of tears, but not from the physical pain alone. No, it was something much deeper, a shock that felt like ice in her veins. The memories of so many years ago, when she was dragged through the streets during a protest, were now coming back with a vengeance. But this time it was worse. This time, she was too weak to fight back, too frail to survive this second round of horror. This time, there was no one coming to save her. The light in a window across the street flickered on, then immediately went out. Someone had seen, but no one would do anything. No one would call the police, because the police were the ones doing this to her. They were the ones responsible for the violence, for the terror that was unfolding in her front yard. Far away, in the shadows of the night, Maya knew. The GPS signal had just stopped at the coordinates of her mother's house. The audio feed from the tiny microphone transmitted sounds that made her blood freeze. Shards of breaking glass, the pounding of boots on the floor, her mother's scream, and then the chilling silence, and finally, the sickening snap of bones breaking. Maya didn't need to think for another second. The game was over. The hunt had begun, and those beasts would not leave the street standing upright again. Her fingers tightened around the laptop, her heart steady and cold. Every move they made now was a step closer to their own undoing. The pieces of their empire of violence and fear were starting to crumble. Maya had already set the trap, and now it was time for them to pay for what they had done. The ground beneath Lila's body was cold, soaked with the night's dew, blood, and crushed grass. She lay on her side, one hand clutching her shattered shoulder, her face contorted in pain, her breath ragged, like the final gasps of a dying flame. Blood oozed from her mouth, staining the collar of her nightgown, mingling with the damp earth beneath her. The yellow light from a streetlight cast long, twisted shadows, stretching across the porch and over the crumpled, elderly figure lying helpless in front of them. The shadows seemed to swallow her whole, as if the very night itself had come to claim her. Burke approached, stooping down to pull a crumpled stack of papers from his coat pocket. The first sheet unfolded, the property transfer agreement for Lila's house. He slapped the paper down onto her back, using her frail body as a table, then pulled a pen from his chest pocket and shoved it into her face. "Sign it," he hissed, his voice low and grating, thick with the mixture of stress and sick satisfaction. "I've given you too many chances, old lady." Lila moaned softly, trying to turn her head, but each movement sent waves of agony through her body, sharp and unforgiving, like fire. She squinted at the paper, her vision blurred by blood and tears, her neck stiff and strained. But she lifted her head despite the pain. Her eyes were swollen, but the fire in them was still alive. And in her weak, trembling voice, she managed to speak, barely a whisper but still filled with defiance. "I will not sign. This is my home. My husband died here. My daughter grew up here. You have no right." Burke stepped back, his grip tightening around the pen as if he wanted to break it. He gritted his teeth, then suddenly drew his black Glock from his side, the cold steel heavy in his hand. With a smooth, chilling motion, he chambered around, then lowered the barrel to her forehead. "Sign it, or I'll blow your head off right here." Langston stood behind, his face turned away, not out of guilt, but because he didn't want blood splattering on his new shoes. The wind howled between the two houses, the only sound breaking the stillness. No one spoke. The only noises were the heavy breathing of Burke and the weak, frantic heartbeat of the woman lying on the grass, whose life was now at the mercy of the same force she had always fought against: fear, violence, and power. Across the street, from the windows, a few shadows peeked through the curtains. A muffled sob rang out in the silence, choked, desperate, helpless. But no one moved. No one stepped outside. No one called the police, because the police were the ones holding the gun to an innocent old woman's head. Lila's eyes locked with Burke's. There was no fear in them now, only resignation and the faintest spark of the dignity that had been beaten, crushed, but never fully extinguished. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She only whispered, her voice hoarse but resolute, "I will not yield." Then her eyes widened in terror, her body convulsed. The pain, the blood loss, and the shock hit her all at once like a crushing wave. Lila lost consciousness, her head lolling to one side, her face pale as death itself, a pool of bright red blood beneath her like a wildflower trampled by a boot. Burke stared at her lifeless form for a few seconds, his expression one of disgust, then spat, muttering under his breath, "Stubborn old bitch." He holstered his gun, crumpled the transfer papers in his hand, and shoved them back into his pocket. He turned away. Langston nodded without saying a word. The two men walked off into the darkness, leaving Lila's motionless body behind in the cold grass, like she was nothing more than a worthless obstacle in their path. But what they didn't know, Maya had heard everything. From the way they broke the door, the threats, the beatings, to her mother's last words. No more GPS signals, no more recordings. From this moment on, Maya didn't need any more proof. She needed justice. And justice would be paid in blood. Just over 300 meters away from Lila's house, in a black-gray SUV coated with anti-reflective film, Maya sat motionless as a statue in the thick darkness. The vehicle was pitch black, the only light coming from the screen of the laptop mounted in front of her, displaying a live feed from the hidden camera she had planted in the potted plant on her mother's porch. The angle was perfect, capturing everything. Burke raising the bat, Langston kicking, Lila writhing on the ground. The scene unfolded in silence. Maya had muted the sound because she didn't need to hear another scream to know what was happening. Each image that passed by was like a knife driven deep into her chest, cold, cruel, and twisting. The camera zoomed in. Maya's right hand gripped the tactical dagger, a military-grade weapon with a blackened blade, short, sharp as glass. Her hand was clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white, veins bulging as if they might tear through her skin. A single tear silently fell from her left eye, sliding down her sharp cheekbone, landing on her coat. But Maya's eyes, the same eyes that had observed terror in action, that had witnessed her teammates fall in a covert mission, were no longer the eyes of a seasoned agent. They were the eyes of a daughter who had just watched her mother being beaten unconscious. And those eyes no longer shook. They glowed with a deadly fire, cold and terrifying. The screen continued to broadcast. Langston pulled out a gun. Burke pressed the paper against Lila's forehead. And then she slumped to the ground, her body motionless. Maya didn't blink. Her lips trembled slightly, then pressed tightly together. No screams, no wailing. She simply tilted her head softly, like a spring about to snap. She whispered, as if to herself or to her unconscious mother lying on the porch, "Mom, I'm sorry I was late." She closed her eyes for half a second, swallowing the storm of pain inside her. Then she opened her eyes again, her pupils sharp as two pieces of metal ice. Maya reached out with her left hand, gently tugging at her sleeve, revealing the tactical operations watch. She pressed a button. On the screen, a map appeared. The GPS signals of Burke and Langston were still moving slowly, unaware that death had begun following their every step. In the car, Maya didn't need to say anything else. Everything was in place. Every second they survived from now on was the last mercy she would offer them. And in the darkness where the city still slept silently, a daughter was becoming a ghost, not to deliver news, not to judge, but to end it all. The air inside the SUV felt as heavy as lead. Outside, the night wind swept through the empty streets of Chicago, but inside the car, a silent storm was building, not of weather but of will. The screen in front of Maya continued to show the live feed from the hidden camera. Burke stepped back, his face still stained with blood on his sleeve. He turned to Langston, smirking, and then suddenly pivoted, kicking Lila's motionless body on the ground. The force of the kick made her frail body spin, blood splattering from her mouth. leaving a small trail on the cold concrete floor. Maya didn't blink. She didn't take a deep breath to stay calm. No, she wasn't holding anything in anymore. She simply tilted her head to one side, as though committing that final kick to memory, not for evidence, but to ensure that when she struck, there would be no misfire. Her right hand gently set the tactical knife down on the seat next to her. The blade tapped softly against the leather, making a cold metallic clink. Then Maya opened her bag. Her movements were as precise as a machine programmed for perfection. She pulled out the Beretta M9, already equipped with a long suppressor. She wiped it down with a soft cloth, checked the magazine, then reassembled it with practiced speed, so fast it was nearly invisible. She didn't need to look. Her hand knew every ridge, every groove on the gun, just as they knew her mother's face. Next, she retrieved her combat suit. Dark gray, made from synthetic fibers resistant to tears and water, form-fitting yet flexible, packed neatly in a hidden compartment at the bottom of the bag. She shed her long coat, layer by layer, then slipped into the suit like it was her true skin. No longer just an analyst, no longer the grieving daughter, but Maya Thompson, an alpha-level agent, a trained assassin from the farm, the daughter of a woman crushed under the corruption of this system. She strapped the gun to her right hip, slid the tactical knife back into its small sheath on her calf, pulled on black combat gloves that stretched up to her wrists, and finally, pulled the hood over her head, leaving only her bright, determined eyes visible beneath the light of the screen. She glanced one last time at the monitor before switching it off. Burke was still laughing, walking away, completely unaware that he had just kicked the body of a mother whose daughter was about to become his final nightmare. Maya whispered, her voice low and chilling. Not a scream, but a cold vow spoken in the language of vengeance. You're as good as dead. No turning back now. She opened the door, stepping out into the night. The wind cut into her face, cold as steel, but it was nothing compared to the fire burning in Maya's eyes. The night was no longer peaceful, and from this moment on, forgiveness was no longer in her dictionary. No one was coming to save her mother. No one was stopping them. So she, alone, would be the judgment. And Burke, Langston, would pay with their lives for every drop of blood they owed. From the rooftop of an old, moss-covered building at the end of 89th Street, Maya watched silently as the ambulance drove her mother away. The flashing red light swept across the weathered brick walls, stained with blood that hadn't yet dried. She didn't cry anymore. Her eyes had shed all weakness. Only cold, lifeless stillness remained. On the screen of her wrist device, the names appeared. Burke, Langston, Jonas Hartley, Travis Keener. Not just two thugs, but an entire corrupt system operating behind the scenes. She had seen enough tonight. The pain would be remembered, but from tomorrow onward, the blade would be drawn. Maya turned her back on the scene, stepping into the darkness. No need for a declaration of war. The night would be her ally, and anyone who touched her mother would pay with blood. Would Maya uncover who was truly behind the brutal eviction scheme? Would she act in time before she herself becomes the next target? If you don't want to miss the next heart-stopping, blood-soaked battle, subscribe to the Emotional Journey channel today, because the next chapter will leave no room for mercy.